Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is May 5th. On this day in 2016, a Los Angeles jury delivered a long-awaited verdict. Lonnie David Franklin Jr., a man who had become known to the world as the Grim Sleeper, was convicted of 10 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. His crimes stretched across more than 2 decades and centered in South Los Angeles, where he targeted some of the city's most vulnerable women. This case shocked so many, not just because of the brutality involved or the length of time that Franklin remained undetected, but because of what it revealed about who gets noticed, who gets protected, and who is believed. Today, we're diving into the terrifying details of Franklin's crimes, how he avoided capture for so long, and the trial that finally brought justice to his victims and their families. Let's get started. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was born in Los Angeles, California on August 30th, 1952. He served in the U.S. Army, but his military career ended in disgrace. In 1975, he was dishonorably discharged following a conviction for a gang rape in Stuttgart, West Germany, involving a 17-year-old girl. After returning to California, Franklin worked for the city as a sanitation worker and mechanic. To most people around him, he seemed like an unremarkable man, but beneath that exterior was someone who was hiding a horrifying darkness. Between 1985 and 2007, Franklin carried out a string of murders, at least 10 that were confirmed, though investigators believe that the real number is much higher. His victims were primarily young Black women, many of whom were sex workers or struggling with addiction. These women were often overlooked by society and, in many ways, by the system that was meant to protect them. Franklin earned the nickname the Grim Sleeper because investigators believed he stopped killing between 1988 and 2002. But as more evidence came to light, many people questioned whether he stopped at all. His list of confirmed victims spans more than 2 decades. Franklin's method was horrifyingly consistent. He often approached women with offers of help, a ride, or money. But then, once they were alone, he would either shoot them with a .25 caliber pistol or strangle them, or sometimes both. Then, he would dump their bodies in alleys, behind buildings, or in trash bins, often covering them with debris. It was as though he wanted them to be forgotten. Some of the known victims are Sandra Elisa Dismuke, 21, Deborah Ronette Jackson, 29, Henrietta Wright, 35, Barbara Bethune-Ware, 23, Bernita Rochelle Sparks, 26, Mary Catherine Lowe, 26, Latrika Denise Jefferson, 22, Alicia Monique Alexander, 18, Princess Cheyenne Bartholomew, only 15, Valerie Louise McCorvey, 35, and Genesia Lavette Peters, 25. But then there's Anitra Margette Washington, the only known survivor. On November 20th, 1988, Franklin offered Anitra a ride, but instead he shot her in the chest, sexually assaulted her, and then dumped her on the side of the road. Miraculously, she survived. Anitra gave police a detailed description of her attacker and his orange Ford Pinto, details that would prove critical, but not until decades later. What police didn't know then is that Franklin was not only committing all of these crimes, he was documenting them as well. When authorities searched his home years later, they found over 1,000 photographs and hundreds of hours of video footage. It was mostly of Black women, many of whom were unconscious or appearing unaware that they were being filmed. Some images dated back to the 1980s. And these weren't just trophies, they were clues that pointed to the sheer magnitude of his crimes. The LAPD released 180 of the photos to the public in the hopes that families might recognize missing loved ones. Some women were identified, others never were. For decades, Franklin flew under the radar. Even though police had DNA from multiple crime scenes, they couldn't match it to any suspect in their database. It was almost like he didn't exist. But everything changed in 2008 when California became the first state in the U.S. to implement familial DNA searching. This new forensic tool looked not just for an exact match, but for genetic profiles similar enough to suggest a relative. That search led investigators to Christopher Franklin, Lonnie Franklin's son, whose DNA had been collected during an unrelated felony weapons conviction. It wasn't an exact match, but it was close enough to suggest a family member might be the grim sleeper. From there, police zeroed in on Lonnie, but they couldn't just walk up and ask him for a DNA sample. So instead, they went undercover. An officer posed as a busboy at a local restaurant where Franklin was eating and collected a pizza crust, a drinking glass, and silverware. DNA from those items matched the evidence from the murders. After decades, police finally had their man. Franklin was arrested on July 7, 2010, outside his home on 81st Street and Western Avenue in Los Angeles. Inside that home, police discovered the disturbing archive of photographs and videos, as well as personal items belonging to several of the victims, including ID cards and jewelry. The case also sparked debate on the ethics of familial DNA. We've talked before about how some praise it as a breakthrough and a way to bring closure to cold cases. Others have concerns about privacy, racial disparities in databases, and the potential for misuse. But in this case, it cracked the investigation wide open and finally gave families the name of the monster who had taken their loved ones away. The trial began on February 16, 2016 in Los Angeles Superior Court, nearly 6 years after Franklin's arrest. Prosecutor Beth Silverman led the case against him, presenting DNA evidence, photos, ballistic testing, and powerful testimony from the sole survivor, Anitra Washington. Silverman described Franklin as a predator who derived gratification from dominance and control. She told jurors, quote, "He got off on that too, and that is why he did it over and over," end quote. The defense, led by attorney Seymour Amster, tried to cast doubt. They argued that other DNA had been found on some victims and suggested that someone else, perhaps even a relative, was responsible. But the jury wasn't convinced. On May 5, 2016, the verdict came in. Guilty of 10 counts of first-degree murder and of 1 count of attempted murder. It took jurors just a day and a half to reach their decision. A month later, on June 6th, the same jury recommended the death penalty. Franklin was formally sentenced on August 10, 2016. During the sentencing hearing, family members addressed the court. Their voices, full of sorrow and rage, echoed through the room. For some, it brought a sense of closure, but for others, no sentence could ever fill the void left by their daughters, sisters, their mothers. Franklin was sent to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. But on March 28, 2020, he was found dead in his cell. The cause of death was never publicly confirmed, though officials said there were no signs of trauma. Franklin died without ever expressing remorse or fully accounting for his actions. And many people believe that he took the truth about more victims to his grave. The legacy of this case goes far beyond the courtroom. It forced the city of Los Angeles and the nation to confront uncomfortable questions. Why did it take so long for these women's deaths to be connected? Why were their lives, their disappearances, not met with the same urgency that is seen in other cases? The Grim Sleeper case has become a symbol of systemic neglect, how race, poverty, and gender can determine whose lives are valued and whose stories go untold. But the victims weren't statistics. They were daughters, sisters, friends, and mothers. They mattered. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline, is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!